Before Moby Dick became a legend, there were real sperm whales terrifying whalers across the ocean. One destroyed a ship. Another became famous for supposedly surviving dozens of attacks. And those stories eventually helped inspire one of the most famous novels ever written. And the real animal behind all of it is already one of the strangest predators on Earth. So how much of Moby Dick was actually real? Let's find out. Let's figure out what sperm whales actually are. Sperm whales are the largest toothed whales on Earth, and adult males can reach around 60 feet long and weigh tens of tons. One of the first things you might notice about them is their giant ass head. A sperm whale's head can make up close to a third of their entire body. Their giant head plays a huge role in how they hunt. Sperm whales spend a lot of their lives diving into the deep, dark water looking for prey. And down there, eyesight is not going to help you very much. So instead, they use echolocation. They fire out incredibly powerful clicks and listen for the echoes coming back. And they are the second deepest diving whale in the world, right behind Cuvier's beaked whales. But sperm whales can still dive close to 2 miles down and stay underwater for over an hour. And the reason they are diving that deep is mostly for food. Sperm whales hunt fish, squid, and other deep water prey. And yes, that includes giant squid. Now, are they constantly having 40-foot death matches in the abyss? Probably not, but sperm whale versus giant squid is still the closest thing we have on Earth to a real kaiju fight. And while we're stacking ridiculous facts, sperm whales also have the largest brain of any living animal. So this is a massive, deep diving predator with the biggest brain on Earth, insanely powerful echolocation, and a head that looks like somebody attached a battering ram to a submarine. And naturally, humans looked at this giant animal and thought, we should chase that thing around the ocean in small wooden boats. That sounds like a great idea. So why were people going after sperm whales in the first place? A big reason was the stuff inside their giant head. Sperm whales have an organ filled with a waxy, gooey, white substance, spermaceti. And that's how sperm whales got their terrible name, by the gooey substance in their head. But spermaceti was incredibly valuable. It could be processed into high-quality candles, lamp oil, and lubricants for machinery. And sperm whales also provided huge amounts of regular whale oil from their blubber. So to whalers, these animals were basically giant swimming barrels of money. But the biggest problem was actually catching one. But in the early 1800s, whaling ships would spot a sperm whale from the distance, then lower much smaller open boats into the water and row towards it. And once they got close enough, somebody had to physically throw a harpoon into the whale. But the harpoon wasn't meant to kill it. It was meant to attach the small boat to the whale, which means these guys would intentionally stab a several-ton wild animal and then tie it to a tiny wooden boat. If the whale took off, the boat could get dragged behind it at high speed in what became known as the Nantucket sleigh ride. Looks like a lot of fun, right? And obviously, this could go horribly wrong. Whales could smash boats, flip them, strike them with their tails, or drag sailors into the water with the harpoon line. Eventually, if everything went according to plan, the crew would pull back alongside the exhausted whale and finish it off with a lance. Then they would have to tow the carcass back to the ship, strip away the blubber, and boil it down into oil. It was brutal, dangerous work, and most of the time the whale lost. But occasionally, one would fight back, and in 1820, one sperm whale did enough damage to become one of the most famous whales in history. In 1820, the Essex whaling ship operated in the South Pacific when the crew encountered a massive sperm whale. And this time, the whale did not lose. According to first mate Owen Chase, the whale first struck the Essex hard enough to seriously damage the ship. Then it moved away and came back. Chase described the second hit as a full-on charge, with the whale driving its massive head directly into the ship. The damage was catastrophic, and the Essex began to sink, and the crew was forced to abandon ship. 20 men escaped into 3 small whaleboats, and somehow the whale was only the beginning of their nightmare. The crew spent months drifting across the Pacific with very little food or water. Men began dying from starvation and dehydration. Eventually, the survivors resorted to, can you say cannibalism on YouTube? In one case, they even drew sticks to decide who would be killed so the others could eat. Only 8 of the original 20 men survived. One of them was Owen Chase, and a year later, Chase published his account of the disaster. The story of a sperm whale powerful enough to destroy a ship would become one of the major real-life ingredients behind Moby Dick. But the Essex was not the only sperm whale that sailors were talking about, because decades before Moby Dick was published, whalers in the Pacific were already telling stories about a massive, pale sperm whale that lived around Mocha Island, off the coast of Chile, and they called him Mocha Dick. Most of what we know about him comes from an 1839 article written by Jeremiah N. Reynolds called Mocha Dick, or the White Whale of the Pacific. And this is where we have to separate history from legend. Reynolds was recording a story that had been passed around by whalers. So some of the details are probably true, and some are almost certainly exaggerated. But according to the legend, Mocha Dick was enormous, pale white, covered in scars, and had survived fight after fight with whaling crews. He supposedly smashed whaleboats, escaped with old harpoons still buried in his body. So when people described him as this terrifying monster of the Pacific, it is worth remembering that the humans were the ones repeatedly throwing harpoons into him. Eventually, according to Reynolds' story, Mocha Dick was finally killed after another violent battle with whalers. The men claimed that he was more than 70 feet long, produced around 100 barrels of oil, and had at least 20 old harpoons still embedded in his body. Now, did all of that actually happen? Short answer, we don't really know. But it almost doesn't really matter, because by the 1830s, the legend already existed. And 12 years after Reynolds published the story, Herman Melville published a novel about another giant white sperm whale with a very familiar name, Moby Dick. So as we can see, Herman Melville did not invent all of this from nothing. Before writing Moby Dick, Melville had actually worked aboard whaling ships himself. So he knew firsthand what this world looked like. He knew the boats, the harpoons, the danger, and the kind of stories sailors told about whales. He also knew about the Essex, and Melville used the story of Mocha Dick. Add those two legends together, and Melville had the ship-killing whale and the legendary white whale, as well as his own experience in the whaling industry, and he turned all of that into something much bigger. In his novel, Captain Ahab has already lost his leg to the white whale, and he becomes completely obsessed with getting revenge. The crew of the Pequod is supposed to be out there hunting whales and making money. Ahab does not care. He was willing to abandon profitable hunting grounds, put his crew in danger, and basically turned the entire voyage into his personal revenge mission. And at that point, Moby Dick stops becoming just a whale. To Ahab, the animal becomes everything he hates and cannot control. Nature, fate, chaos, whatever you want to call it. And that's what makes this story so interesting. Melville created this almost supernatural monster, but he built it out of things that were already happening in the real world. Sperm whales really were enormous. Whalers really did get dragged around behind them. One really did sink the Essex. And sailors really were telling stories about a giant white sperm whale Melville did not invent the insanity, he turned reality into a legend. And somehow, the story kept getting bigger. Moby Dick was not a huge success when it was first published in 1851, but over time it became one of the most famous novels in American literature. Moby Dick became more than just a character in a novel, he became one of the most recognizable animals in fiction. Hollywood helped keep that legend alive too. Moby Dick has been adapted again and again, including the famous 1956 film starring Gregory Peck as Ahab. I actually watched that 1956 movie to prepare for the episode, and damn, it still holds up. Highly recommend. I hope you learned some things and enjoyed the episode. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. And my catchphrase works really well on this episode. Nature is random and chaotic. I will see you next time.